It's a pleasure to introduce again Professor Kalidas Shetty from North Dakota State University. He already gave a lecture, presented a lecture on Friday, and this is the second one, and tomorrow it's going to be the third one. And today he's going to talk about part of his work, his research at his university, and just to again briefly mention something about Professor Shetty. He's originally from India, and he did his Bachelor of Science in India as well. Then he moved into the United States to the University of Idaho, and then there he did his master and then his PhD, then postdoc in Canada and Japan. I'm not reading. And he worked for several years in Massachusetts, more than 20 years, and then he was called to North Dakota State University. That was 4 years ago. 4 years ago, okay, and he leads there the GIPSIA, this is the Global Institute for Food Security and International Agriculture. He's the founder, and he is also vice president for international relationships from the university and professor of plant sciences. He has over 200 publications, and it's really a pleasure to have him here. Okay.
But I'm actually a microbiologist, but
I forgot that.
but the good, yeah. But right from undergraduate to now, I've always had plant alongside with me. But in the end, maybe I'm more of a plant scientist. But it doesn't matter. Life is a full circle of systems. So that's what I will highlight to you today is. As we look at these global challenges, there are many global challenges, and among these, food security is an important issue, but we cannot look at all challenges in isolation anymore. We need to look at the system that interconnects these challenges. And so as we look at food security challenges, I'll also look at the ecological foundation of this challenge, and more importantly, the consequences for public health, which is really now all the major diseases we are facing on the planet today, starting from non-communicable chronic disease and even infectious disease, they have a foundation in breakdown in food security challenge. That means we are eating food, but we are not eating quality food. And so they directly have implication in our public health challenges. So I will highlight to you those challenges. So my presentation today, the focus will be on food security and public health challenges, and how do we use metabolic innovation and a more ecological approach to metabolism and integrating molecular concepts. But also, I like to see how this challenge is connected to the larger global challenges. So my talk will be divided into a larger framework of the challenges globally, and then I will sort of lay out conceptually the different areas. So for young people who are here, one of the most important things for you as you develop is to build a strong conceptual foundation of your research. So when you have a strong conceptual foundation of your research, applications become more organic and more spontaneous and more logical. And so that's a big lesson I try to impart to my own students, but also as we collaborate around the world. A conceptual foundation is very rigorous and important and sort of connects the framework. And now this conceptual foundation has to have a systems logic, and I'll give you those imperatives of those logic as I go down. So before I go into the larger framework of metabolic innovations in the context of food security, let's quickly go down to where the global innovation economy is. As you know, the world economy has shifted away from resource-based economy. So if you look at colonial structure, even how Latin America, North America, rest of the world, and including my own roots, India, we were all in one way or the other shaped by the grabbing of the resource structures by the political and economic system of the world. So that resource structure, though it was a trade related prior to it, about 500 years ago, but it was localized, like Asia was within Asia. There was no larger migration. But as guns, germs, steels developed, you had the colonial structure emerge, and not to blame any colonial structure, but that's a fact of life. So this colonial structure was based on resources, or even later the oil structure that we the world is fighting a lot of wars on, is also a resource-based structure. But that resource-based structure was valid up to the end of the 20th century and still has relevance today, but it's not relevant anymore because we have built a knowledge-based economy where the higher educational knowledge-based economy is very, very important. So that happened because we better understood the quantum concepts early part of the century. So as these atomic concepts developed, by 1953 we moved into the biomolecular, based on Watson and Crick and beyond, and the 60s, from transcripts, how all that work, cellular function work, and finally in the 80s and beyond, we have the systems revolution, especially information becoming integrated across the world or being transmitted much more easily. And then with the advent of Google and other great companies, now you have an information integration as well. So as we go into the 21st century, you have an emergence. If you see all the big global companies, they're still ExxonMobil, all are important in the 500, but these Apple and Google and Facebook, they're all super companies now. They're all based on this innovation economy. And so that is a dramatic shift. So knowledge is premium, much more premium than resources. So take Japan, for example. And Japan is there's water resources and other resources, but they're technologically advanced resources that depend on bringing resources from elsewhere, but it's an innovation economy. Same thing where what's happening in India and China, the information revolution or the atomic revolution, biomolecular, they are moving them, even though the resource structure is still important. So we are in a whole new knowledge-based economy, and in this knowledge-based economy, as we move into the 21st century and look at the challenges, societies that are going to advance are the societies that can integrate knowledge. That's a very important. That can integrate knowledge. And what do we integrate? There are 4 major areas of integration of innovation. And those societies that can do that will advance much more efficiently. And those are, we have to live in a sustainable environment, and the biological system that are within that environment. We have the most rapid species decline in our history, in our known history, happening at this moment. And so we are in the phase of a Anthropocene decline and maybe even extinction, because we are not paying attention in our resource structure, not paying close attention to how we are warming the planet and how the biological interface of this is working. So if we understand this sustainability logic, that's why we need a systems-based approach. Then societies that can innovate across this as a global society, then they will be the leaders. Because all our problems, all the technology can be great, but if we do not sustain the environment in which our biological systems work, then we will not advance. So everything else is futile. So that's very important. But also you can see, while we had the Apple and all the great integration happening in the Silicon world, you can see there's a absolutely amazing advancement happening in brain sciences. So if the 6th extinction does not have to happen, where is the human being going to advance? So the human beings have to move beyond their Darwinian and Freudian mode. So what is the Darwinian mode? Our Darwinian mode is that, so our Darwinian mode is we procreate, we get the resources for sustaining that procreation, and we do our social interactions to do the both of that. And so it does not matter. In that context, empathy, kindness, and compassion disappears. But as we are seeing a lot of brain science work, we are seeing ultimately that if society has to advance, these active functions that are instinctive needs to be silenced, and we need to go into the realm of consciousness where empathy, kindness, compassion has to take care of understanding of the environment and the biological system that come here. So this advancement in cognitive sciences is a very exciting phase of research. So societies that can understand that and put empathy into a social structure, then we are better going to slow the carbon war, global warming, the needs of public health challenges, needs of food security, needs of clean water, needs of diversifying away from carbon-based fuels. So brain sciences and understanding of brain science is one of the fastest growing, very exciting phase of research. You can see it in Caltech, MIT, Wisconsin, all of these great universities, University of Tokyo. This is a very exciting field. So these are the 4 areas and the interface that are shaping the innovation economy. And those that society that can integrate and understand this larger integration and how does the output come from this integration, those are going to be the great innovators. The Googles are doing that. Now if you look at Google, where are they gone? They put Google aside into one and they moved it to Alphabet. So if you look at all the 20 companies under Alphabet, one is doing food innovation, another one is in brain sciences, another one is in new energy systems, renewable energy systems. And then if you look at Facebook, if you look at Apple, they all are moving into the different aspects of the domain. They are taking their own strengths and they're starting to move into the biological realm, because we live in the biological realm. So these machines have to integrate into the biological realm, and we have to live in an equilibrium world, not in a reductionist world, because nature is a system, and system is based on control points. So that point I will bring again and again. So this control point logic of an overall system, and how do we develop hypotheses based on control point, is going to be the basis of innovation. So repeating that again, we are a system, and the control points that shape that system are going to be the basis of the resilience and robustness of the system. That's where equilibrium comes in. So science that's derived and hypothesis that's based on that control point logic is going to be the base of innovation. And that's already happening. And these are the 4 realms where it's happening. And food security is one of them. So I'll use food security and public health as an example to illustrate advances here. So if you look at the larger questions, we are a population of about 7.2, 7.3 billion today. And by 2050, we're about 9 billion. And with the changes in African demographics, we'll be about 11 to 12 billion by the end of this century. So that 11 to 12 billion people means, what is our food security going to do? But the good news there is, today, since 2000, we are in a global obesity crisis. Why is that? Because today, for a population of 7 billion people, we have enough calories for 12 billion people. So today, our food security is narrowly defined by macronutrients: protein, carbohydrates, fruit, lipids, minerals, and vitamins. So we have enough of this, though it's badly distributed. We have still 1 billion people not getting enough of this, but we have 1.5 billion people and more, rapidly growing in that phase, who have more of this narrow, refined macronutrients. And therefore, since 2000, the global public health crisis has shifted towards non-communicable chronic disease. So the fastest growing disease in the world today is diabetes and its complications. Okay? And that's directly linked because today we have calories available for 12 billion people. In America, for example, every American has an average availability of 4,000 calories. So from a calorimeter model, we need 2,000 calories. People in Nigeria, Tanzania, they have 2,000 available, but they're all this hyper-processed carbohydrates. So what happens when you don't, in a sedentary lifestyle, when you don't use enough of it, they go into the lipid storage system, right? So there's an imbalance in our nutritional use, and therefore we are in a new phase of global health crisis that's directly linked to food security crisis. So food security today is not just about meeting the nutrient needs of that 1 billion people, which is, we still need to meet that, the adequate nutrition for all, but more importantly, a new phase of food security has emerged where we get enough of the macronutrients, but we get poor quality. So this poor quality can be only rectified by diversity of crop from every ecology. So we need, by nature is very resilient because it's diverse. It gives many options. So the more we tap into this diversity and bring this diversity, it's not only good for ecological sustainability, but it's also good for public health. And I will illustrate that by example. Okay. So if we have to address this food and health wellness, guys, we need to go back to a diverse ecology and sustain a diverse ecology and have respect for all of the ecology and not come to a more narrow choice of crops that we have come. So today we have 100 crops that we use for our food system, and only 10 is the major macronutrient, big crops that feed 80% of our food comes from 10 crops. So we need to shift that to a more wider diversity so it's more ecologically resilient, but also you can see it has public health implications. Okay, so that's a key point. So as we move forward, technological and economic impact will be impacted by advances in life science and information technology, which I just highlighted earlier. You can see the three big areas of life sciences: environment, cellular systems, brain sciences. But the information technology is going to feed each of these. It's going to make our life better. It's already making our life better. So unless we understand these four poles, then we will not understand the overall technological advancement. And further, we have environmental consequences of this, and we can see that in water quality and carbon, the fossil fuel base. Because today, 60% of our energy comes from two major fuels, petroleum and coal. Coal is declining, but we're still dependent on petroleum. So no wonder the carbon is increasing, and we have this global warming that will reach about 40 ppm by the end of the century, about 30 ppm before the industrial revolution, and then now we are in the middle of that. So we are trying to hope to sort of not reach 40, but instead of 35, about 38. That's what the Copenhagen agreement was based on that. But I don't know how with the new political system, whether we will go or whether we are destined for extinction. I hope not. I hope there's resilience. So that environmental concern has linked to our energy implications. Unless we decentralize and move from 60%, and the good news is it is already happening in the coal. So if you look at the new rapidly growing economies, India and China, all the coal plants are all declining, and they're all being replaced by solar, because solar kilowatt hour has moved to 5 cents per kilowatt hour. So it was about 10 cents, which is too expensive to replace coal, but now it's about 5 and 4. And so you can see these big solar plants slowly replacing coal. So that's where I have hope that we are going to go into a whole new energy diversification, into renewables, and slowly start replacing coal and then start replacing petroleum. And petroleum, it's already dropped to 50. It'll never again go above 50. And that's all because we have moved to renewables. Right? And if at all we had didn't have Fukushima and had better designs for the nuclear and in terms of waste management, then we would have probably moved faster towards non-carbon dioxide emitting technologies. But now solar has given us hope, and there are other technologies coming on, and we can already see the coal disappearing globally, especially in these major economies. Coal is gone, and oil prices will not come above 50. And it's around hovering about 50, but that's the demand, especially from India and China, is dictating that. And then local policy. Another great thing that's happening is the battery technology. So today with Tesla, in about 3 years, all the cars that are costing $25,000 will disappear. So if you're owning a car, you will have better hybrids and better electric cars, and the mass production is the issue. So in 3 years, that mass production is possible. So in about 10 years, it's very reasonable that even $10,000 cars will disappear, will be replaced by Tesla-like hybrids and Tesla-like car industry. So once that happens, the petroleum prices will go down to 30. And so that's where even the big producers like Russia and Venezuela, they all, you can see the decline, rapid declining in the Saudi Arabia. It's all because the carbon fuel pressures have sort of knocked them down. So the environmental consequences of sustainability are directly linked, and they're directly interlinked, and they have direct impact on freshwater issues. But the most important point of this slide, these are all systems. One is linked to the other. So if you just take carbon fuel, so what do we do with agriculture today? We use the 100 years old Haber-Bosch process, make a lot of urea and ammonium nitrate, and fertilize it. And like corn, the number one sugar crop on this planet, right? High fructose corn syrup and animal feed coming from this corn. They're grown in a floodplain with 200% more nitrogen, growing a tropical plant in a temperate zone, because the roots nitrogen utilization efficiency is not good. And so we use 200% more fertilizers, 75% goes into a water stream. So very inefficient system. So soil biology is essentially negligible. So one of the big advances happening in corn is to change it into a lemna grass. They can't get the genes from teosinte, but they have to cross lemna grass into teosinte, and they're trying to bring it into corn so that you make it more compatible root system. But the point in all of this is it is directly got to do with the nitrogen utilization efficiency, because now we are using carbon to make nitrogen and grow abundant carbohydrate. And so what happens from all of this? This abundant carbohydrate is giving us the fastest rate of growth of diabetes in the world, right? So carbon to nitrogen to carbon to our carbon, glucose imbalance, right? Is a carbon problem. So this carbon problem is not just an environmental problem warming the planet, but it's an environment problem that is destroying our biological system, our own. So today, it was projected by 2030, global diabetes will be about 400 million. Today, it's going to be around 600 million. The projection is being revised. Okay, so consequences: higher rates of cardiovascular disease, all other diseases. Like in Arabian Peninsula, you have among the diabetics the highest rates of Parkinson's. They have 3 to 6% higher Parkinson's among diabetics. Right? Same wound healing issues. So they all go into the problem. The point I'm making is the carbon is linked all around. It's not just one point, but multi-point. So it's a systems approach. So if you understand the control point of the system, then we can have better hypothesis. Okay, one of the control point is carbon is the culprit. So how do we now make better intercrop system? So now grow more legumes. For example, many parts of the world in Latin America and India, we had a legume ratio of 3-to-1 in our diet. Today in India, the fastest growing diabetes country in the world, the cereal legume ratio is 20-to-1. With this wrong notion of food security, the government subsidizes 1 rupee rice. Well, the legume cost is 150 rupees. 1 to 150. So they should be subsidizing legumes and growing more legumes. So by growing more legumes in an intercrop system, it's more ecologically better. You fix the atmospheric nitrogen that uses less nitrogen. It's more healthy. If you make it's clear that societies that have a high legume intake, all the chronic disease indicators are very low. And we have research showing that anti-diabetic factors in legumes are very high. So it's ecologically sustainable, uses less fossil fuels, and it's more healthy for the environment. So the point here is, if we understand the system's logic, when we correct one system, it sort of feeds into the other system. So the more you take a systems approach and develop your hypothesis, the more impact you have around the system. Okay? So that's a very important point. So system is an emergent complex system, but those emergent properties are made from individual components. Those components itself, they are important, but they're more important when they're in the system and controlled by the system. They themselves are not important. For example, like a bulb. Each of those components are useless on their own, but they only work when they are integrated together. Same thing in a plane. So how that resilience and robustness is controlled and understood is the basis of hypothesis. So in biology, it's not like a machine. We have 3.5 billion years of evolution. So if we follow the control point logic of how the ecology developed, then we can better define this metabolic framework that controls each of those emerging systems. So if you derive your complex understanding of the system and understand the emergent properties, which if you reduce them, they break apart. But how do you now maintain the resilience? By understanding control points. So this control point logic is very important. So using that, in my institute, we said, okay, there are many issues, but from a control point logic, what is really failing? So we identified 4 major global issues that are relevant in which North Dakota and our crop systems of the Green Plains can help. And those 4 areas, number 1, we still have 1 billion people on the planet hungry. We cannot, we have to have social conscience so that no one in this world is hungry. So we still have to meet food security. But second biggest challenge, even in these poor countries, you have fastest growing rates. The poorest who have very poor, refined, very poor diet, especially in terms of macronutrients, they are the fastest to go to diabetes when you give them enough macronutrients. So if you see around the world, the poor communities of the world are the first to go into diabetes. In America, it's the Native Americans who, after their food system has been broken down, we give them all these government supplies of high carbohydrates. And so they have average lifespan of 57 years and 3.5 times higher diabetes rates. You see poor African Americans in the urban community. You see the poor white Americans in the Appalachia. So the minute you go to poverty and get government subsidies of macronutrients, your diabetes rates shoot up. And this is a global problem. Especially it affects the indigenous communities the most because they developed a traditional ecology on which their food system was built. And suddenly we dump them with macronutrients based on this new, calorie meter model that we have developed. So if you see around the world, the Australian Aborigines, the Aborigines of New Zealand, the Aborigines in India, the urban poor around the world, all over the world, the poorest who are first deficient in macronutrients, and suddenly we dump them with all these food subsidies that are poor in nutritional quality, they are the first to go to diabetes. So in many parts of the world, this hunger and this excess calorie, they coexist. When we try to correct the hunger problem with macronutrient model, they go to diabetes very fast. And you can see this globally. And you can see why. If you go to your grocery store, it is starch and sugar. And starch and sugar all along the aisle. And so therefore we need to change that. So these 2 are the important issues. And number 3, we have to now address both these issues with climate changing. We have these extremes, extra rain, as you just said, and it is a global problem. So the extremes are much more wide, much more common now. And therefore, how do you build resilience? How do you take some of the yield and build resilience into these food systems? So that's a very important part, stress improvement and resilience. And number 4, a lot of the antidotes for the chronic disease emergence, especially oxygen malfunction, and I will bring this point a little later. A lot of the antidotes, the fruits and vegetables are highly perishable. And so we should be able to preserve the food in a decent way so that these antidotes for these chronic diseases are available. And therefore, food waste management, especially good quality food that can counter the excess calorie disease and the malnourishment related diseases need to be addressed. So that using these 4 major platforms, we are now seeing how can we now bring quality into the food. We are still able to produce for 12 billion people, even at the end of the century when we reach maximum of 12 billion. But how can that 12 billion be of high quality that not only addresses the hunger needs, but also fights non-communicable chronic disease? Okay, so that's where plant breeders, biologists all have to get together. And so I will address this further. And as you see around the world, the fastest growing economies in the world are here now, and in some way they're countering these chronic disease and addressing it, but still on the old calorie meter model. So while that's being addressed, we still have around the equator, still have this coexistence of malnourishment and battling chronic disease higher, but also in the advanced countries, you can see the biggest diseases now are NCDs, non-communicable chronic diseases. And so how this food security epidemics has moved to public health domain has completely changed. And so how we produce our food has to completely change. We need a more diverse food system, more wider array of food system. Okay. So as we see here, the fastest growing diabetes problem in the world is diabetes, which is now going to be 600 million by 2030, not 400 million, it's 600 million. The whole demographic shifted. If you look at Mexico and India, India is already 100 million diabetics, and it's worsening. And it's a largely a vegetarian society eating super rich carbohydrates. Right? And the poorest are affected the most. See Mexico, if you go to Monterrey, the richer part of Mexico, closer to the American border, you go to streets of Monterrey, there's Diabetico, or they have all these testing systems, but no nutritional shops to counter it. So the whole dynamics of health has dramatically changed. So if you look at then the food today, we have three major flaws in today's food system. First of all, our food is highly refined. So this highly refined food does not provide support for two important metabolic elements of our of our health. Number one, we don't work like a calorie meter. We burn our nutrition through mitochondria. So this mitochondrial-based logic is missing in our food system. So we produce this refined food, but when we have super high refined food, our mitochondria is not able to capture all of it. And more importantly, the last step in the electron transport chain, as the Krebs cycle feeds the NADH into the mitochondria, the water forming steps goes disarray. The last step where the oxygen coupling to generate water, as the electron transport happens, as the protons are shuffled to gather your ATP from NADH, they break down. When you have soup, whether it's carbohydrates themselves or whether carbohydrates is converted to lipids through beta oxidation, they both feed an inefficient or oxidative phosphorylation. So the role of mitochondria and how mitochondria takes these refined foods is missing. And especially we strip away from the whole foods all these good compounds that fight the mitochondrial breakdown, the antioxidant. So the antioxidant not only directly quench, but they have to support the endogenous antioxidant enzyme systems that we have that needs not the overexpression of Krebs cycle, but shifting it away towards the pentose phosphate pathway so that the anabolic reaction and anabolic countermeasures against the antioxidant breakdown, against the oxidation breakdown happens. So one of the important failures of our food system is the not understanding the role of redox biology and how efficiently our mitochondria works to get that energy from the food, and especially the breakdown that has happened from super highly refined food system that we eat today. So the mitochondria is not able to keep up with it. And plus we do not eat enough fruits and vegetables to counter these compounds that fight it. So for example, in America, we should be eating 7 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables every day, but we eat less than 1. And in indigenous communities, it's half. In African American communities in the urban environment, it's less than half. So we're eating, if you go to the store, it's all chips and salt and all these highly processed food. So the mitochondria system is under dramatic, serious pressure. So if you follow diabetes, you see all the metabolic breakdown emerging from that. Okay? And then what is actually obesity? It's a defense mechanism against super high carbohydrates. Our body first tries to protect us by making more fat cells. And then at some point the fat cells have to, work its way, either supply us in extreme need or it sort of system breaks down. And where does it break down? At the mitochondrial function. A second very important is this whole lack of whole food profile is not supporting our microbiome. Our microbiome has shifted when we have a highly refined food system. And then when we have the microbiome that has evolved with us. We are still prokaryotes. We may have 650 million years ago, eukaryotic system may have evolved, but we still coexist with our prokaryotic system. And this is very clear. So we need to feed our prokaryotes in our system, and especially the ones that favor a good metabolism in our system, not chase them away with this high refined food system. So it's very clear how the microbiome changes now from in different forms, and therefore these whole food profiles, the fibers and oligosaccharides and the antioxidants, they're also important to feed our microbiome. So these two flaws have to be addressed, and that's the metabolic logic we have taken into redesigning our food system, and based on local ecology. And with this, we have developed a seed to human health technology platform that we take to different parts of the world. So we think every ecology on the planet is important because the food system developed for that particular locale, and we humans adapted that. So the more we sustain that diversity, the more resilience we can build into the system. More wider can we fill these gaps in the food security. More better it is for ecology. More better it's for value addition to the local ecology. That's why these geographic indicators are very important. So we need from the health to the ecology, we need this whole systems approach and see that they are control points that shape the system, and sustaining the ecology is very important. So using the systems approach and all other technologies that we have come with it, for example, the traditional fermented food systems of Asia, they have 4,000, 5,000 years of history. So they are important deliveries of the microbiome for us. They're important processes that preserve our food. And since they're doing all of this processing in an anaerobic system, they preserve the antioxidants that are required for the whole food profile that we need. So metabolic biology has to be captured into our food design. So with this kind of logic, we are in a post-genome integrative biology where we have to define the problem, and that helps us to define the system's logic on which the hypothesis is built. So it's not just about the information that is important, that are part of the system, but how is the information or the control point that affects holding of the system at any of these levels. So these control points can be at the genomic level, transcriptomic level. So identifying the control points is the basis on which we can have solutions. So therefore, asking the right question should be based on that control point. And so in our own research, we have said oxygen is an important control point. To date, we understand carbon is fixed, carbon is hydrated, carbohydrate. So plants does that for us. Then the nitrogen is added and makes amino acids and protein. The carbohydrates are modified and we get lipids, so we get our macronutrients. So this carbon being fixed, carbon being hydrated, and nitrogen being added is the basis of our food, is what we eat. But we feel that the fourth element that is important for our food system is the oxygen. So we fail to consider the role of oxygen, because it is the oxygen that goes with the glucose that ultimately, at the last steps of the mitochondria, helps to derive the proton electron motive force and the ATP generation that can break down. And that breakdown is cause of all our major diseases, right? So therefore, the role of oxygen is an important control point we have not designed into our food. And therefore, that's an important question that we have tried to, missing point we have tried to integrate. And this has logic. It's not rocket science, because if you just look at our 3.5 billion years of evolution from our ancestral prokaryotes, you can see that as engulfing took place, as higher forms developed, our ancient prokaryotes are still important for the mitochondria and chloroplast-based eukaryotic system that developed later. Because we are still dependent on the chloroplastic system, because we are not autotrophic. But in all of this, our ancient prokaryotes are an important part of this. And the more we understand this interdependency and the common metabolic control points, then we can define the system better and ask the right question. So that right question that we have asked is, why isn't oxygen being considered in the design of our food? Why only carbon that's fixed? Why only the nitrogen that's assimilated? So therefore the breakdown in our system is actually what we breathe and the quality of the air that we breathe. Okay? So this is logical. The empirical evidence of this from cultural frameworks, from all cultures, from Asia to other cultures, that breathing is the essence of who we are, right? So what does breathing do? And what is the base of its metabolism? So we found that's a very important control point. And then as we look at the metabolic basis of our system, we can see now build this rigorous conceptual framework to start teasing them out. How do they interact? Why do they interact? How do they interact in our different parts of our food chain? So how do we now take modern understanding of genomics, transcriptomics, all these omics into this framework to develop better questions, to have better hypotheses, to make solutions that are more systems integrated, that are more equilibrium based, not reductionist based, not breaking down. So we need an equilibrium basis for our logic. So with this kind of logic, if we look at closely, we found role of oxygen and lack of redox balancing food is one of the important breakdown. And this requires not only protecting the mitochondria, but it requires that Krebs cycle move into pentose phosphate pathway, a very important basis for making anabolic responses in eukaryotes work is the pentose phosphate pathway. So if we go with that logic, see how quickly we can go into the hypothesis, right? So when we go into hypothesis, nature is very restricted. It has allowed eukaryotes to work in a certain way. And if you follow that logic, then you can define a hypothesis much more rigorously. Okay, not a chance, right? Because our cells have to follow those rules. Because there's only carbon and water and oxygen, and of course there's fluctuations happening with our carbon, but and then oxygen can be polluted, water can be polluted, that can affect these basic nutrients. But overall, our cells have adjusted to these four elements. So that logic needs to be taken, and the role of oxygen is missing. So as we look at the metabolic interface and ecology interface that ultimately affects the signal transduction and gene expression and the system breakdown, if we can correct that first phase, then we can prevent breakdown in signal transduction and breakdown in gene function, right? So that really is the approach we have taken, and this is again not big, something new, because eco-evolutionary pressures have affected the plastic nature of genes. Genes change. They can change positively and negatively. You can see negative changes in terms of, say type 2 diabetes among Asians. As they move to a high-calorie Western society, then suddenly their diabetes shoot up. But now even in India, they have brought on to this wide, narrow choice of food. So now they're having the disease not just when they go out, but they have it in India itself, in different parts of India. Likewise, if you see the Japanese, when they're in Japan, they have a very wholesome whole food diet. But the minute they come to Canada and Hawaii, their breast cancer and prostate cancer rates equilibrate to the rest of the heterogeneous population. So what is that telling us? We are epigenetic beings. We change. So as much as we change negatively, we can also change positively. So this approach of a metabolic approach and an environmental approach and a whole systems approach, and especially at the conceptual level, protecting the mitochondria and stimulating the pentose phosphate pathway in our food design is the basis of our rationale. And this systems approach is very important. And this redox biology coupled to the microbiome logic is an important control point in redesigning our food for having positive consequences on public health. And you can see this whether it's in soil biology. I took the example of corn production in America. We are growing, all these corn roots have become tap roots, not fibrous roots, because we have dumped this excess of nitrogen into the system. So how do we change the soil biology and the rhizosphere that supports that? And so it's not that the nutrition is bad, but we need to reshape that nutrition and make it much more nitrogen utilization efficiency improvements. And then you can see across all other ecosystem, the soil microbiome has important implications in health. And so if we take this further, the bioactive enriched foods. It's not just not the probiotic, but the fiber, but also the oxygen function. So the host and the microbiome, they have to coexist harmoniously. So foods that can do that is essential, and any ecology that has supported that local food diversity needs to be looked at very closely to bring that back. And I'll give you some example of why there is some evidence for that. And therefore, if you look at today into a food, it's not the structure breakdown that happens. For inflammation, it's COX-2 breakdown. For cancer, it may be P53 breakdown. But all these breakdowns happen when we have consistent breakdown in our redox function. So ultimately, the structure function breakdown happens when the cellular system is constantly bombarded with breakdown, right? With the redox breakdown. So the more food we take that can regulate the host antioxidant enzyme response and control the redox regulation, the less damage that will eventually reach COX-2. So what we eat every day can protect the structure function that eventually breaks down. So most of our drugs today are designed for structure function failures. They are not designed for the overall cellular protection. And so even when we start thinking about functional food, we're taking a pharmacological approach, which is fine. We may need that in when serious breakdown happens. So when we have arthritis, we need to take something to quickly help that arthritis. But as we look at the overall system, a constant protection of your cellular system with everyday good foods that's rationally designed based on a more system logic, then we can prevent that breakdown. Of course, we have 100, 120 years of lifespan, but that lifespan can be of good quality, right? So today, how we can feed that and how the overall dietary management can control the oxygen-based function and our host responses has to be one of the bases of how we look at our food system and its consequences for public health. So this protection of the mitochondria and fine-tuning the human health relevance of oxygen biology at the mitochondria, it's very logical. So it is the 500 million years of land-plant evolution that is the basis of our food system, whether we eat animal foods or plant foods, or both of them. And so as our modern diet emerged, we need to move away from this calorie model where all calories are equal, all carbohydrates are not equal. How we metabolize fructose is very different from glucose. So we need to see how the calorie we take are treated by our mitochondrial function, our cellular function. So as we go through the metabolic basis of that and the disease sensitivity response, we need to develop a new model away from the calorimeter, burning in a calorimeter and saying, oh, okay, here is 1 gram of carbohydrate giving 5 kilocalories of energy, so many calories, or 9 calories from fat. So we need to move away from that and say, bring back a mitochondrial based metabolic. And how this is done, we are still in the infancy. We need to start rationalizing a much more cellular model of how our diet can be designed. So if you go to the grocery store, it's not basic calories, but some metabolic index. So what is that metabolic index? So that needs to be refined. And also, as we understand genomic fingerprints and epigenetic responses, as these technologies emerge, we need to harmonize both from a food consumption and at the host end. So it's emerging, but we have to realize where the breakdown is and how we move away from this. And therefore, a combinatorial profile of food is very critical, because each of these foods that developed in ecology, whether through human interventions in domesticating it, or from a wider array of food system, there a more diverse combinatorial profile is essential, because each of those plants have to deal with the same rules, but they develop slightly different variations to deal with that function. And therefore, as we capture some of that diversity into our own diet, we have better weapons to fight it. Okay? So if corn and radish and legumes, all different, fronted in different way. Those elements, if we bring it in a diversity of our diet, we have more options for our own fight. Right? So that's a simple logic. So the diversity becomes important because in corn dealt with that, it's a C4 plant, dealt with it differently from a C3 plant, right? And vegetables dealt with it differently. The source sink relationship was different, but they all dealt with it because it's in the same ecology. So as we bring that diversity, we have a better option. So therefore, diversity is good for ecology. Diversity is good for our food security. Diversity is good for resilience of our health challenges. So that's the very important logic, and there's metabolic basis for that. And therefore, as we are in this high-calorie, super refined dietary with environmental pollutants, both water and the air we breathe impacting it, the role of oxygen becomes very important, and we can see the impact of this right from diabetes to cardiovascular disease and all the diseases that emerge from a calorie-dense situation and diet we face. Likewise, obesity is directly linked to oxidation-linked breakdown, so also aging. So this oxidation, what we breathe, has a central relevance into our diet and how we redesign and look at diet. And this is again, has basis in plants. Plants being sessile have dealt with this either in their stress response mechanisms or in their reproductive mechanism. Reproduction is also a stress mechanism. It's saying, oh, okay, I'm dying, let my next generation. It's a Darwinian, important Darwinian concept that's there in nature. And therefore, under all of these adaptive mechanisms within the Darwinian logic, the protective mechanism has been built into our plant system. So if we understand that and start capturing all these bioactive compounds into our food system in a diverse ecology, we can better correct the imbalances in our food system. So using such kind of logic over many years, thank you so much, we have over many masters, PhD and postdocs, we have looked at, we don't want to reinvent food system of different cultures, but we took examples of different cultures. If a student came from Peru, we said, work with your own food. If a student came from Malaysia, we said, you work with your own food. So we gave the choices to apply these concepts within their cultural framework. So as we built those cultural logic, we've studied many species, depending on the number of students. In the years, we're lucky to get so many students from all over the world. And in this case, as we build diversity, that even is better. So we have this good conceptual framework on which we have students from Brazil and Peru and everywhere attack that same problem, but from a different angle. And then they take back that logic back to their own country and sort of rethink about their food system based on their local ecology. So using this logic, we have applied it, and we have also narrowed down some choice of compounds just to explain the biochemistry better. So we've looked at biphenolics in Lamiaceae, L-dopa and sort of legumes because they have implications in not only into diabetes but also into Parkinson's. Isoflavonoid, not only antioxidant but also postmenopausal sort of endocrine modulation function that are very important in physiology, both men and women. Flavonoids, so we have antimicrobial. So we looked at some class of compound that can give us structure function relevance much better as we redefine this diversity of food systems across different cultures. So as we built this, we have built many tools in our screening. For example, in Lamiaceae, a lot of the Lamiaceae perennials, the mint, rosemary, they're highly cross-pollinating. So one of the strategies we did is, okay, if 100 seed is all different, how can we use tissue culture to isolate single seed phenotypes and then use stress mechanism to see which has the high levels of these antioxidant and related functions. And then we pick the single seed phenotype and multiply them in a controlled environment. But yet try to maintain the ecological diversity. But that's needed as the systems in this human managed system breaks down, we can still go back to our diversity. Okay? So we tap into such logic around the control point logic. Likewise, when the seed sprouts, the redox pressure is very high, so they produce countermeasures against it. So just by sprouting, we can trigger these these protective elements. So not only whole foods that are there in the coat and others that are important, but the redox protecting compounds emerge. For example, one of the soybean work we've been looking at, there's a company in Taiwan that uses one of our methods from our published work, where they just sprout for 36 hours before making the soy milk. And that 36 hours increases the phytoestrogens to a higher level in the soy milk that they design. So we can use this elegantly in different ways. And most importantly, right, this is one of the big, most exciting projects, the microbiome. That in traditional fermented foods of the world are important source not only for microbiome, for the fermentation system that was developed, but also important source of our good microbiome. So this has become a passion for me. So I go around the world trying to look for these secret, tools that are there, but also make it viable for them, for these local communities. Keep it so that even geographical indicators and others can help them to preserve it for their own well-being. But also bring this logic in a more scientific, rational, and see why these traditional fermented foods were so valuable. And so as we tease out them out, it helps us to preserve those traditional food systems under which this fermentation was built, but also it rationalizes this whole microbiome interventions that we need. The fermentation become a very important source of not only the antioxidant, because under redox environment, a fermentation system where oxygen dependency is reduced, they preserve the antioxidant compounds, but also they enrich for many of these good bacteria that are important for us. So using this kind of logic, here's an example. We have an oregano that's a line that's very high, even if you put it under low sugar, they produce an important rosmarinic acid, which is very similar to resveratrol, and they can survive in this low carbohydrate environment for even 18 months to 2 years. And then there's another variety, which you just give high sugar, they immediately die, start senescing and die eventually. And one of the important reason is they do not have not only the biphenolic that's this produces at high levels, but all the coupled reasons for why that biphenolic is broken here. And the minute you give high sugar, they start senescing. There's a super high Krebs cycle. And then all of this leads to oxidation breakdown. Okay. So this not only becomes an important screening tool, but also an important metabolic basis for understanding why this single seed phenotype that behaves way it behaves, why this behaves differently. Okay. So using this kind of logic, looking at sprouts, now summarizing many years of work in plants, what we are seeing, and we need more evidence for this, under these high redox protecting situation where not only redox protect compounds are needed that couple the antioxidant enzyme response, what plants can elegantly do is only use part of the Krebs cycle to still provide reductants for oxidative phosphorylation. And they can do that by going to a proline coupled response, where proline can replace NADH as a reductant in oxidative phosphorylation. But by doing that, they also allow the pentose phosphate pathway to be stimulated. So by using the Krebs cycle efficiently for energy needs that need to be run on an OXPHOS system, and also allowing the pentose phosphate pathway to be operational, where they make important sugar phosphates and NADPH, all the precursors for anabolic response are triggered. And these anabolic response could be cytokinins, purines, indole acetic acid coming from the phenolic pathway, all sorts of developmental and related flux that a plant needs to adjust and work its lignin precursors. So all these important steps for readjustment of the plant, better root hairs, they all come from the pentose phosphate pathway. So if some of the carbon can be moved, they not only make the plant more robust and better to readjust, better able to readjust, but also they make the important precursors that then can couple and better protect against the oxidative pressure. Okay. So this logic we have seen in many sprouts and how we screen plants. We're seeing it across many species. And we are now trying to use a lot of genetic and metabolic tools to prove this more conclusively. And so we are seeing clearly that there is a rational basis of protein-coupled responses as being an important Krebs cycle control that allows the pentose phosphate pathway to be efficiently run. By trying to couple this, we can better design the food, whether it's sprout or screening a new breeding line. So that means the metabolic rationale needs to be brought into our food production system, whether it's breeding or whether it's processing like in sprouts, whether coupling it to a later fermentation with yeast systems or fungal systems. So in all of this logic, if we can take this Krebs cycle interface with the pentose phosphate pathway, is an important control point. So if we use this control point, we think after many years that this is a very important gate to redesign our food. So this is an example in plant, and so through this, not only precursors are there to make the lignin precursors, but also the polysaccharides are more efficiently channeled into the cell wall. So that means overall flux builds the fiber, builds the antioxidant, builds the precursors for purine readjustment for new synthesis, makes purines for cytokinin, makes the indole compounds coming from here for indole acetic acid. So you need the cytokinin and auxins to make the roots better. You need the cytokinins to make the RUDP carboxylate work better, right? So cytokinin is directly linked into that carbon fixation pathway. So everything that you see that is needed for efficiency of plant in its fixation comes from this gate. Whether it's new DNA synthesis, from where the purines are the limitations, or ATP. So ATP requires adenine, or GTP requires guanine, right? So all the critical precursors, all are dependent on pentose phosphate pathway. So if you can make this gate efficient and partition more efficiently between the Krebs cycle and this gate, then your plant system is better served. So now you build the genetic basis of this, processing basis of this, see what happens, how is this integrity preserved in processing, and or when yeast ferments it, or fungi sort of aerobically grows on it. So if you can follow this, then you have a better conceptual base. So what we have done is applied this into diabetes, particularly these type 2 diabetes where 90% of the cases are. These are adult onset, diet and lifestyle influenced disease. So using this conceptual framework, we started applying this. And therefore finding solution requires a strong dietary and whole food strategies, correcting critical steps, which I will tell you right now. So today, it's projected by 2030, 400 million. Actually, it's now going to be 600 million because of the rates in many developing countries, India, Nigeria, these high population countries. Nigeria population of 200 million, nearly 12% are diabetic. Mexico population of 120 million, very high, one of the highest per capita rates. Indonesia population of 240 million, nearly 8% are diabetic. They have a much more diverse diet. India, a population of 1.25 billion, close to 120 million diabetics. China, they have a diverse diet, a population of 1.3 billion, about 90 million diabetics. So the whole diabetic rates globally, in America, we are about 33 million in a population of 330 million. And so you can see this, Brazil is still about 6-7%. So globally, you can see these trends emerge. Middle East, per capita, Persian Gulf is the worst affected with these rates. And so what we have done is very quickly, what we can see is many of the drug analogs, even before the sugar spike occurs, can be controlled from food sources. So we have started to screen the ecologies. My students coming from Peru and Malay, each of their foods have compounds that can control the pancreatic amylase, that can control the glucosidase, so that the sugar spike is controlled. So when we eat the whole food, right, high levels of these compounds, you can see that you can control this level. And therefore, the time given for your insulin to keep working or your pancreas to come and take charge of it is given more time. Okay? So that's what happens. Your pancreas deals with it, and very soon it breaks down. And then your pancreatic system breaks, and very soon the type 2 onset, you start, the insulin uptake is broken down. Once the insulin uptake is broken down, you need more insulin to sort of push it in. And so slowly you have to go into insulin insensitivity occurs. Then you need injections ultimately, which is like type 1 diabetes. Only 5 to 10% of the diabetic is where pancreas is not there, you need injections. But ultimately 90% are adult onset, and it's a progressive disease. And you can take, if you look at these pathways, more than 60-70% can be reversed by diet and exercise. And looking at the metabolic basis of that. And I've dealt with this personally, because about 4 years ago I was diagnosed with pre-diabetes. And so when they tried to put me on metformin and early stage of blood pressure, because diabetes immediately leads to blood pressure and cholesterol issues. They all connected in a metabolic framework. So I said, no. I should be knowing all this. Because of my travel, I've sort of built all this from probably for many years. So within 1 year, I'm off. I didn't go on medication. So this last visit 2 weeks ago, said, no, you don't have to go on medication. All your parameters are good now. And so I've seen a lot of relatives, my own mother-in-law deal with this. So this logic is not some, theory. It's my own journey. So it's possible. It's realistically possible. And there's an ecological basis for this. And so as we look at this disease, glucose control is an important, and later pancreatic beta cell function improvement. Legumes can help this a lot. Oxidative breakdown in the vasculature. So a lot of the flavonols and chocolate to bilberry, blueberry. There are a lot of these compounds that can open the vessels. So especially wound healing, turmeric, many compounds that can open these micro vessels very, very well. You can see why blueberry, after you take a blueberry, suddenly things clear up for you, especially if you take in the morning. I don't know whether it's placebo effect, but so there are evidence of how the vessels open up. Blood pressure control, we have many legumes, many foods that have a macrovascular control of the blood pressure. So from food, lipid control, there are many compounds that are both in the food and sort of the herbal medicine platform that you can pharmacologically screen them, right? So they're just not, blind screening, but very relevant screening. And also looking at, fructose versus glucose, are they equal as they relate to fatty liver? They are different. Fructose causes more problems in leading to fatty liver. So therefore, how we look at inexpensive refined calories is very important. So as we look at this, we have seen even basic rice. So on the planet today, wheat and rice are the #1 carbohydrates on the planet. And if you see some of these old varieties, they have higher not only higher phenolic content, but higher glucose modulating efforts. So why eat this super refined rice when we have better choices? So in one project in India, we're trying to collect all these old rice. So in one research center, we have now 800 old rice collections, these indica rice varieties, so that we can bring it back into our breeding system. Instead of as it's breeding, for example, Bali, a small island, when it had 50, 60 varieties, now they have 4 varieties. The old varieties are lost. But luckily in India, there are a lot of remote parts that was inaccessible, where these varieties were growing for these rural communities. So it was good to capture them back. Same thing, one of the biggest things that's happening in India is millets are coming back into regular. There are sort of millet food fairs in urban environments where they bring these millets as food solutions. And so a lot of cultural changes are happening around these challenges as we face this crisis. So a lot of as we rationalize them biochemically, we can help these reform movements emerge much more rationally. And so with that, even with the herb, for example, lamiaceae, I love lamiaceae because every culture on the planet has some lamiaceae in their diet, in some soup or some way or the other. And so the more we rationalize lamiaceae, we can bring it into curry or soups or some addendum, pizza, whatever different ways. And mints particularly, they're all over. In every culture there's some mint of some form. So this logic can be applied, and you can see that they're very alpha glucosidase inhibitor effects, very similar to the drug acarbose, but with less effects on inhibiting alpha amylase. What happens when you have high tight inhibition of alpha amylase? You have undigested starch, you get diarrhea. And so when you have mild alpha amylase, your starch is still broken down, but slowly. And then you control the uptake of that glucose. Then your insulin is given more time. So you can design that with this food of different choices, and you blend the food, soup or heterogeneous basis of your own cultural framework. And so hypertension modulating, many berries, legumes, mints, onion, cucurbits, pepper, particularly the squash family. Like I'll show you an example. This is one of our favorite projects. 2007, one of my PhD students at the University of Massachusetts, we just took the three sister crop of the indigenous community of North America. Colored corn, beans, pumpkin. And we screened which of those individual varieties within that had the anti-diabetic and anti-blood pressure components. And then later we have extended that logic further, which I'll explain in a minute. So this is the three sister crop. So we started screening what are the anti-diabetic, anti-blood pressure components. And now it makes sense when they put all that into a framework. See, we can quickly come to see how the anti-diabetic example is. So not only is the three sister species an ecological, legumes feeding cereals and squash growing on it, and one of them having an ecological implication. But you bring them all together, they have very strong metabolic interface. Okay. So as we started looking at Lena, who my other student, she came from Brazil to look at the Peruvian food system. We can see all these benefits in their traditional food system. And so now we have taken that example, and now we just published another paper where we're taking this three sister crop and making another diversity from our ethnic influence in America, like African Americans bought kale, then a few other cultures bought tomato, onion. So we are making the three sister based gardens and trying to take this to the indigenous community so that they can even at least get 10 to 15% of their local food themselves with this logic, with this rationalized approach. And so we then screened which of them could be put into this local garden, right? And then we are now going to the next step, what recipes they can make from the historical examples. And so they're not magic bullets, but one of the many interventions that they can have. So some are very late in their disease, but still they can have good diets from their own framework instead of eating. Like the minute they go into hospital, they still get high carbohydrate diets, right? Even though they're diabetic. So if you watch closely, go to the hospital food, especially if you watch what diabetics eat, they're still eating the same food that made them sick. Right? And so if we can intervene here at different stages and also in the community setting, then there is evidence for that. So we built on this 2007 paper. We just have this accepted in Journal of Ethnic Foods. So we think every diverse community needs to build that logic, and it can be built. And then as we know more of this diversity, we can incorporate ideas. So here in this garden system, we are taking the basic Native American idea of North America and then saying, oh, African Americans bought this, Asians bought this, others bought this. So now you can make a multi-diverse system that gives you many more choices. And so you now build it into your own modern framework, but keeping the diversity logic in mind. So using this kind of logic, we are starting to look at a wide variety of global foods. And you see this, this pumpkin, not all pumpkins have the ACE inhibitory potential. Only certain pumpkin varieties have it. So we can bring that into the production framework. Okay. Likewise, Lena, she worked on the evaluation of indigenous or Peruvian Andean region for anti-diabetic, especially the Andean people. They come from the mountains into Peru, the diabetes rate shoot up. So how could we build their own traditional food back, when wherever they go along the coast? And there's basis for their traditional food system. Likewise, we looked into the Brazilian diversity. India, this is a very exciting project personally because India has the fastest growing diabetes. Eggplant has not its roots in Italy, it has roots in India. The diversity of eggplant is huge, and it's put into all sorts of curries. So there was a very exciting accident that happened. So there's a temple in South India. So this temple gives free food. So when these poor diabetics came to a hospital in a temple town, well, they were waiting for this public, in public health system, you have to wait. So they obviously, they had some checkup and they went to the local temple and had this local food with the eggplant. And suddenly they noticed many of these diabetics, they came around 3 o'clock. The sugar measurement was very low, especially they could not really see the reason why. They are high in the previous measurement, but if they were measured at 3 o'clock, it was very low for the same population. And then they asked, where did you eat? They said they went to the temple and ate. They were poor, so temple food. And in the temple, they have this very traditional eggplant. It's very old. And they make their curry out of it with the beans. And then we measured the anti-diabetic factors, alpha glucose. Oh, they're like skyrocketing, super high. So now you can see why. They're even stronger than acrobal, the drug that they give for alpha glucosidase inhibition. So now we are trying to look at the entire diversity of eggplant around India, because they're used in different ways around India. Likewise, mulberry. In some cultures, they eat mulberry as a snack. And mulberry actually has vogelibos. So actually what happens there is the silkworm eats it, and then it uses the gut bacteria to chop it, and then it frees up. And so that particular drug is pretty high in that worm, but not in the mulberry itself. It has to go through the system. But there's a few other interesting twists on the mulberry issue. But the point is, in all of this, there is a sugar metabolism control across the ecology. So if you can bring that ecology into our food framework, we can control glucose as well as the complications of glucose. So that's the logic. So if you start following that, you can start both in the pulp and the peel. We can start monitoring all these complicated steps of the glycemic control pathway and the blood pressure pathway. Likewise, we have taken this historical fermentation bioprocessing across our cultures. So we are trying to build a wide food microbiome initiative. And so as I bring these different students, I'm trying to tell them, focus on your own food microbiome and take it back and build a system in your own native place. And so as we're taking this, we are trying to see how they modify these food matrix and how do they get these control compound. So it's not just diabetic, it can have impact on cognitive functions. Inflammation, that's a very important part, inflammation control. So you can find many bioactives for all our functions in our food system. And they come in small doses. Okay? So if you take low to small doses, so for me, as I try to understand, my mother has diabetes, arthritis. So as I realized that, I started overdosing myself with turmeric, including a purified turmeric. So I am now already in the 50s. My conditions are better than when she was in the 50s. So now she's following my method. She's 81. And so her pain's also less. So she doesn't take some of the inflammation inhibitors that are being recommended. She's reducing that as well. So these analog can be found in the food system and can be bought. So fermentation is a very important element to this. Through using that, we have designed like blueberry, soy, yogurts. So we can redesign our food with these principles in a modern food. So some of my students we worked on a soy cranberry based probiotic to bring not only helicobacter control, but also components that affect the diabetic pathway. And plus, we are now trying to see, as these climate resilience issues come into different ecologies, we are trying to work with different fruits of that region. For example, we have a student from Brazil who worked on camu camu and its biotransformation and how it can improve the anti-diabetic function, because some of these fruits are highly perishable. So if you don't quickly capture them and transform them into useful products, they rot and die. So a lot of these perishability issues can be addressed by biotransformation and fermentation. So through that, you not only preserve them, but also bring the microbiome into this framework. So this will be very important as we look at these climate resilient strategies. More of this with different matrices, and likewise, any different types of food we can look at. This is some of my doctoral student work with cherry. Likewise, again, more of this kind of work. You can design it the way you prefer, keeping the science. So the point in all of this is that we have some models, yeast model, but also a planaria model. Planaria is a worm. You cut the head grows back. Cut the hind, it's like a stem cell model. And so what we do is once you then put oxidative pressure on it, and you slow the head coming back. And then you put the compound of interest and see if you can normalize it. And during that, you see whether this redox coupling is all shifted or brought back to normal. Okay. So using this kind of eukaryotic model, you can get what's called a rejuvenation. So food as a system is actually a rejuvenation model. It's not a corrective like a drug model. You want to keep your food viable, your body viable all the time. So we find this planaria as a useful model. So also we have some quick screening with yeast. We have a yeast model where we put a lot of UV or oxidative pressure and force the high oxidative pressure on the yeast and correct it by our compound. So using this, we have good screens, eukaryotic screens, for which of these compounds will have relevance in the next step. Okay. So both the planaria, they have helped us to see that this proline coupling response may be valid even as we take this in our diet, right? So then as we take it in the diet, how does it couple so that the antioxidants response is also coupled? Okay. So we are autotrophic system, just like the planaria or the yeast. We take our food. And so as we take our food, how do we counterbalance it? So we have we also do it in post-harvest preservation of meats. We take meat or even post-harvest preservation of potato. So in all of this, we can show this, as we put these antioxidant countermeasures, how we can preserve the tissue. So which sort of reflects how we can preserve our own tissue. Okay. We have live system and we have a post-harvest stage system, both in plants and animals. So it has implication in post-harvest preservation as well. So using this kind of model, we have we also have a cancer model, where in very late stage cancer, if the cancer cell has malfunctions, then any compound that is breaking it down would push it to apoptosis. So normal cells will take a compound like a redox modulating compound and keep its antioxidant response working. But if there are breakdowns in any of them, like it would be in some different stages of the cancer cell, then that same compound will push the redox pressure to high and force apoptosis. So the logic here is, when you consume the same compound which normally protects normal cells, how is it pushing the injured cells towards death? It's like wound healing. So when you cut, very soon you have necrosis and scabs developing, and very soon the scab dies. So it's quickly going into apoptosis. So how can you access? So there are some compounds like turmeric or lemon balm. like in Germany, they use lemon balm for herpes, for herpes injury. So when they use it, they can reduce the number of days in which the pustules fall. So essentially what that's doing is pushing the cells towards death more quickly. So can you keep normal cells normal? And because the injury in all of these abnormal cells, can you push them towards cell death? So that's the logic we're trying to use here. So there are a lot of compounds in our food. If we can use them to push injured cells towards death quickly, whether it's cell level, then our rejuvenation model can work. So using that, so if you look at this metabolic approach, this metabolic interface is very critical. If we can preserve this stage B, then the signal transduction and gene expression will be normal. And if there is some breakdown here, and if we can accelerate any breakdown, then abnormal cells will die quickly. So that's the platform we need for food. Is every day as we eat, how do we preserve normal cells to be normal? So with this logic, we are looking at whole food-based clinical studies in different parts of India, but more importantly, we are trying to link it to local value-added economic development. So I have social transformation projects in Thailand, in India, and also in Bali, Indonesia, Haiti. When we individually can talk, I can explain this. We are hoping we'll do some study abroad programs here and also link it to some social development projects. Because if you don't translate this immediately, then it's useless. It remains theory on some good publications. But we need to translate that. So we've been working on this for the last 10, 15 years. Like in Haiti, for example, it's 4.5 hours from Port-au-Prince. So there's a school we have started, and in that school, we have started a grandmother center. So the grandmothers of the village, they are not even included in anything. So we have sort of organized them, and their job is to get together and chat among themselves, but also they have responsibility of cooking for the children before they go to school. So we have designed sort of a moringa-based, goat meat-based, legume-based soup for them, for both the grandmothers and for the children, based on their local food. And so the children have to eat, they can eat at 8, 10 o'clock and then go on to school. So we're trying to bring this transgenerational linkage that addresses school nutritional needs, but also the children can come after school and stay in the grandmother center and do their homework. So we can tie some of these logic, and then the farmers who are local, we are trying to improve their local small farming. They supply all the basic, the goat meat and eggs, moringa and legumes. So we can build this integrated system. So we have different examples in different parts of the world linking this, and they feed into the regional and national food security. So this is very important. The more we can help more localized system to be self-sufficient, and then the world system works better. So this kind of logic, we are taking the redox boundary platform from plant growth to proven effectiveness as the discovery engine, as a systems-based platform for economic development. And using that system, we also have developing a very exciting project on microbiome for climate resilience and human health. How do we tap into the microbiome that can help plant growth to be more resilient against climate challenges, but also be more nutrition for human health? It's a dual function platform from the same platform. So this is a very exciting research. We think, and now we have another model. We want this model. So any partner we have around the world, whether it's Costa Rica or Ecuador, we hope to convince them to use this as part of their research and start building their local food system and see how we can make better value chain within each local environment. And so I'm like an open source system, right? We have to look at it as a planetary need rather than some patents and other things. So this open source platform approach, we are taking it to around the world, and if you see, they're all connected. It's a systems logic. Climate resilience is an important challenge, and that impacts our health, and we can correct many imperfections in the overall system as a result. So using this approach, we are developing microbiome for crop resilience system. We have some projects around the world. Traditional fermented foods as a source of healthy microbiome. Microbiome and ecological emergence. This is a very beautiful project, especially one in Iceland. Because Iceland is a young country of 70 million years only, formed from volcanic eruption of the clashing of the Atlantic, the European and the American plate. So there's still land still emerging, but as the land forms, first the lichens come and then they grow, and then suddenly from a low nutrition, they suddenly have plants like thyme and berries. So how do they come about? We're seeing that there are rich microbes in the lichens that fix the atmospheric nitrogen and build up the nutrition. So this potentially happened in terrestrial environments. So it's a very beautiful environment to see how the eco chain developed and how the eukaryotic system built up over time. And so ecological emergence, diversity, resilience, Great Plains, Iceland, India. We hope we do some things in Costa Rica. And then biotransformation is a very important angle, both for waste management as well as bringing useful microbiome both to agriculture and the larger ecology. And therefore, in my final slide, is we need to take this ecological framework of Earth's biological system, how they emerged, and how it had a cultural framework in different parts of the world as humanity went to different parts, and using a good, strong metabolic logic, using a systems logic, we can build this into a very problem and solution-oriented approach, where we apply system logic as a basis of hypothesis, and using systems logic and control point logic, we can have better resilient systems, and more a system that is very relevant all the way from soil health to human health. And if we can implement this across the world in each ecology, then we better address the global challenges. And these are not magic bullets, but reasonable options as we face these challenges. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And there are any questions?
You were speaking a lot about like sort of metabolite breeding.
Right.
But then how is the relation in terms of yield? Because sometimes I think that yield for farmers, quantity of food, is yield.
Yield. Very good.
Yeah, quantity of food.
Very good question. In many cases, when you have mixed farming, in many cases, the yield need not be compromised. So I'll give you a good example. 70% of the world farmers today are fed by 70% of the world population today are fed by 500 million small farmers, and the yield is pretty low. So there's a lot of at a very individual small farmer level, yield, sustainability, and diversity, they can go hand in hand. So the question is, these 500 million farmers that feed 70% of the population need not fall. This other model is important too. If bought the macronutrient platform, but that's reached its productive capacity, and where some yield has to be shifted. So that means we need to shift away from the carbohydrate. So then, for example, I'll give you an example in India. A lot of the millet farmers were in the dry land. They were growing millets and not having enough income. So they were the poorest of poor. Okay. So now the millet has become the big antidote for the diabetes, and for good reason. So many have, both in the dry land and in the other areas where they were growing other crops, have shifted a lot in the millet production because the price is very high. And some of the best millets that are suggested, like also jowar, that's the sorghum, food sorghum. So both of them in these dry land, the crop yield is low, but the quality of that is very highly priced. So I think there's already a quality element coming into these food issues. So when you're talking about pure yield in starch or protein, then there's low, price issues come. But as we move into the quality issue, as you're seeing in the millet platform, so many of these dry lands, so now dry lands are becoming very valuable because they are the best places to grow these high bioactive sorghum, right, with low rainfall. So now with the government policies and interventions, this whole, it's in the west coast of India, so the mountains hit, and the other side of the mountains is these dry lands. So those farmers are now reaping the benefits, and there's a land rush there. And so, I think as we build these issues and the scientific platform, the quality will take over. Same thing, quinoa production. Of course, now it's not benefiting locals, it's going to America, for a high price. But again, quinoa in certain parts of Ecuador, which is dry land, has more value, but the yield is low. But that quinoa is higher priced. Right? And so the quality issues will take over as we hit these big challenges.
Yes, moving from these cash crops into more nutritious crops, that makes also a shifting paradigm in terms of economic development or economic activities, because you should change from extensive crops, mechanized, cheap, into more expensive ones that require a lot of labor and.
It's happening. That's why I said this 500, mechanization, it will be important in some parts and some situations. So it's not all or nothing issue. That means there's no one magic bullet for the global problem. So let's take it's a very important point. So land holding, I take India as a good example. Average land holding in India is less than 1 acre. Forget those who have 25, but majority, 80% have 1 acre or less. So they have started to form, like these sorghum growers, they form cooperatives. So a 100-acre cooperative is very, very valuable. I mean, they are getting super priced now. Same thing, the bean growers are doing the same thing. And the government policy has to be improved because now they have subsidized, jowar is subsidized by the government, not the rice anymore, as these diabetes rates are going to. So you're right. So in this too, they can be improvement in labor intensive within the cooperative, but also they can be these small tool improvements. That means even within their tools, they can be better holes for one person to drill. They can be mechanizations to improve their efficiency as well. I mean, it need not be only bullock driven, or you can bring new. Japan is a good example of that. Korea and Japan. They have small orchards, they're highly mechanized. So in some part of the coffee growing areas in India, the labor shortage is high now. So they have started to mechanize for different needs. So that means even for small farms, as they build cooperatives and scale, there can be appropriate mechanization into the low carbon, efficient. For example, my own mother, she keeps 2 cows, not for milk or for any. She keeps it only for the dung to make her vegetables. And so each person, I think, if they use logic and sense for what they need, they can build. And she has 80% of her production is surplus. So she gives it to friends or has some of it sold. Right? And so each farmer and each situation is becoming rationalized in some way. And technology is important, whether it's biological technology or machine or like pricing. They do it on all web, on the texting. So this whole smartphones have become amazing tools for their communication and information. So they have information for specialty crops. where they can get better fertilizers or the inputs, even organic to inorganic. So amazing, improvements that happen. Where are the hospitals that like this? So hospitals are becoming interesting. So there's pharma drugs, and then there are these shops that sell all of this new foods.
And that's something that has to change. This is prevention against treatment.
Yeah, but that will happen because first is these diabetics who were going into the hospital, and they were getting all this same rice and same everything. And so the minute they shifted to these, there were no one to supply. And suddenly, overnight, when some local traders heard about this, they started these specialty shops overnight. And they don't sell rice and other things. They sell millets and all these dal, these red lentils. So I think once you allow demand, traders will come. You just let the free market. Small traders are very clever. Yes.
From what I heard from the presentation, you work with a lot of communities, ethical differences. Do you have any methodological approach preferred for starting to work with a very different culturally population?
Yeah.
Like sociological approach?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Cultural relevance is absolutely central to implementing this. You should never lose cultural relevance, because that shapes the science. So you have common control point logic of redox biology and all of the science, right? That will not change. But how do you take that and put it into each culture? Don't force your culture on them. So we educate ourselves. Like when I went to Haiti, we learned why did they reach that state from 1805 when the slave revolt happened. How did they lose their forest? Why did they come to the way they are now? And so as we start building that, then why did these new farmers emerge? And who helped them and why? And then we say, okay, what are you producing? And so within your framework, can we put moringa? What is the source of protein that you have? Goat. So we didn't say you want to put chicken or something. We said, oh, okay, what is the protein that you produce? How much egg do you produce? And so we took the local logic, local grandmother. So what is in Haiti is very different from Bali or India. They're all different. So we spend a lot of time learning about them, not putting our logic there. So our logic is there, right? Oxygen, carbon dioxide, water is there. Even now in my dreams also I can tell that. But I don't know what is Haiti versus or even here in Nicoya Peninsula. I'm learning why they are living long. So somebody in the hotel told me, oh, they work hard and eat very little. and they don't have stress like us. It's partly true, but more detail, we need to go and study, okay, what is the food, how much do they work, what is that work, and they have spiritual basis, so we don't want to impose our spiritual base on them. What is their spiritual base, right? So we need to be very neutral, but also be bigger learners. We don't know much at all. And so in all of this place, learning about others and cultural relevance is number one. The sciences.
Thank you.
Additional questions?
Modern burdens. Yes.
Do you work with any compounds to prevent gastric cancer?
Oh, not necessarily gastric cancer. We have many projects. We see our publication controlling Helicobacter pylori. So there are two issues there. One is the inflammation itself. So we have a lot of anti-inflammatory components, but also we are finding dual functions where one of the ways in which Helicobacter pylori survives is it puts out urease. to make a microenvironment in a very acidic environment. So if you get urease inhibitors, then you expose them to the acidic environment, right? So we try to screen for urease inhibitors in the diet. And so our long term is not directly in gastric cancer itself, but by controlling Helicobacter pylori, how does it go? And second, how do we know anti-inflammatory compounds? So a lot of the time with the gastric, inflammation starts accumulating over time, and eventually leads to gastric. And so we think a lot of these yogurts, fruit, and so one of the big problems of yogurt is they have added sugar. And so we are now going into non-added sugar, and then how do you put fruits into that? So you take regular low sugar, non-added yogurt base, and then start putting regular fruits into it. And for example, for cardiovascular, melon, if you cut melon, it has a wound response and salicylic acid shoots up. So now you rather, if you're a cardiovascular patient, you can have a low sugar yogurt with cut melons and blueberry that can open blood vessels, right? So these are not magic bullets, but certainly if you eat a yogurt with, like we have a kefir, which is a 12 culture probiotic in American market. So we take the very low, some of my friends I recommend including me, we take the lowest, no added sugar, and I put blueberry, blackberry, cut yogurt, cut papaya, cut melon, cut pineapple. Pineapple has protease, and which is not similar to the Streptomyces version, but has similar analog. So you can bring a lot of these analogs in some reasonable ways, low sugar base and inflammation management. So we don't have the magic bullet but we think, okay, whatever the issue, there can be some path towards it, and slowly as a science, pharmacological and medicine all come to it, we can get better rationalization. We don't have complete rationalization right now, but we have enough logic to move on that path. So you can see some of the H. pylori work we did. We have several on that.
You can share the presentation.